What's the trashiest wedding you've been to? Story 1. An old friend of my wife's invited us to her wedding. They hadn't seen each other in years, so we decided to go. The groom was something else. The kind of guy who looked like he spent too much time online posting about how dangerous he was. He was shirtless, wearing only black jeans, with arms covered in barbed wire tattoos and those cliché, badass quotes you'd find on cheap skeleton-themed merch. The whole vibe was off. It quickly became apparent that my wife and I were the only ones in attendance who didn't live in a trailer park or practice questionable hygiene. At the reception, they were roasting what I initially thought was a suckling pig on a spit, but as it cooked, something was off. Fluid was bubbling out of it, and its stomach was swelling in a way that didn't seem right. I asked the best man if the pig had been properly slaughtered. That's when he proudly shared the story of how he and the groom got wasted the night before, snuck onto a farm, and stole it. They shot it in the head and impaled it on a long piece of rebar, which upon closer inspection was what it was turning on. Just as we were discussing their little crime, the pig's stomach exploded. Blood, bile, and guts poured out in such a quantity that it put out the fire. My wife and I had already exchanged that silent, "We need to leave" look before this happened, but that was the final straw. We made a beeline for the car and got out of there. Later, we found out the cops showed up and arrested both the groom and his best man after the farmer reported his missing pig. The groom, of course, tried to fight the police and got tased, which was made easier by the fact that he was already shirtless. Story 2. As a wedding videographer, I've seen some things, but one particular wedding in 2018 still stands out. The bride's father got up to give his speech. It dragged on for 30 minutes, full of embarrassing childhood stories about how the bride was unathletic and constantly got hit in the face with soccer balls. Cringeworthy, to say the least. The bride was visibly uncomfortable. Then he started telling a long-winded story about how he used to travel for work and how, as a child, the bride was obsessed with Disney, specifically Pirates of the Caribbean. She would create her own Disney-inspired characters, including one that was a French-speaking bird. She even made hand-drawn cards featuring these characters and sent them to him while he was away. Cute? Sure. But was this the time or place for it? Absolutely not. Finally, he raised his glass, and just when we thought it was over, it wasn't. Two local actors suddenly entered the venue dressed as, you guessed it, Jack Sparrow and a woman in a French beret with makeshift wings. Apparently, they had come to deliver a card, but what followed was an absolute train wreck. The so-called Jack Sparrow stumbled around, acting like he was drunk, while the French bird screeched in actual French, which of course no one understood. The dad played the role of mediator, acting like he was nailing this performance, despite the fact that the bride was mortified and the groom was desperately signaling to the bride's mom to get him off the stage. This went on for a solid 10 minutes. Finally, Jack Sparrow revealed the big card, which turned out to be a giant poster with the couple's picture on it and a generic best wishes message. The whole room was silent. The father-daughter dance that followed, extremely awkward. And yes, I got it all on video. Story 3. I'm so glad I can share this story again. In my early 20s, I attended the wedding of a childhood friend's sister. I was close with their family, so I agreed to go. The invitation stated no gifts, just money, which felt a bit off. It didn't sound like the bride. Later, her mother contacted me and discreetly advised me to bring a physical gift, because the groom's mother had plans to take all the money gifts as compensation for planning the wedding. The venue was unique. It was held in a church, but not in the main sanctuary. It was in the basement. The whole setup looked more like a high school dance than a wedding. My friend, the bride's sister, whispered to me that the bride never got her dress altered, so they had to pin it together with safety pins. They walked down the aisle to a Metallica song blasting from a boombox. The ceremony was mercifully short. No alcohol was served, which fine, but what they did have was 99-cent sparkling grape juice at every table. I knew it was 99 cents because they left the price stickers on the bottles. Then the bride's mother warned me not to eat the food. Apparently, the groom's mother had sourced it from Meals on Wheels, and some of it was frozen leftovers from meals that weren't used. When I gave the bride and groom my gift, they genuinely appreciated it. But then the groom's mother approached me, demanding to know why I didn't give cash. I played dumb, pretending I hadn't noticed that part of the invitation. She was furious. And to top it all off, a guy at the wedding took a special interest in me. His outfit? a white tank top, backward hat, and sweatpants, prime wedding attire. He proudly informed me that he had just gotten out of jail on drug charges and that both the Bloods and the Crips had tried to recruit him. I casually mentioned that I thought they typically didn't recruit white guys. He confidently told me they made an exception for him because he hung out with black people all the time. Then he hit me with this gem that AIDS could be cured by injecting dish soap into the bloodstream. It cleans the blood, he explained. He asked for my number. I declined. Shockingly, the marriage didn't last. They divorced after a few years. The groom got full custody of their 2 kids after social services repeatedly got involved due to the bride's inability to care for them. Story 4. The bride gave a speech thanking her in-laws for financially assisting with the wedding, but she didn't mention her own mother, and that did not sit well. The head table was a long setup made from smaller tables pushed together and covered with one continuous tablecloth. The bride's mother, seething from the perceived slight, pulled her table out of the arrangement, yanking the tablecloth and nearly toppling the entire setup. That's when chaos broke out. The bride was furious and arguments erupted. Various family members tried to de-escalate the situation, but the mother refused to move her table back. Instead, she began inviting random guests, people who weren't supposed to be at the front, to come sit with her. She stayed there for the rest of the night, loudly trash-talking her daughter, the bride, to anyone who would listen. Story 5. I don't even know where to begin. The ceremony was intimate, just immediate family, followed by a reception at a relatively nice hotel banquet hall. Everything seemed fine at first, but by 7 p.m., only an hour into the reception, the open bar was completely shut down. The reason? Multiple guests had gotten so drunk that they were throwing up in the bathroom sinks, causing flooding. The groom, however, was the real spectacle. He had already been heavily intoxicated before the ceremony, but by the time the reception rolled around, he was completely blackout. During the first dance, he kept his hands in the pockets of his cargo khaki pants the entire time. Zero effort. Then instead of sitting with his new bride at the head table, he ate dinner alone, sitting on the floor in a corner of the hall. 2 hours in, he just left. No announcement, no explanation. He simply went home and passed out at their house, leaving the bride to spend the night alone in the newlywed suite. As you might have already guessed, they are now separated. Story 6. I was a waitress at a particularly wild wedding. The night ended with me and the chef rounding up all the kids and barricading ourselves in the kitchen, locking the doors to keep them safe. Outside, a full-blown brawl had erupted among the adults. Some of them had even brought their own weapons, including knives. We locked the doors to stop anyone from A, grabbing more weapons, and B, hurting the kids who ranged from toddlers to preteens. It was just the 2 of us, 2 women trying to keep a room full of frightened, screaming kids calm while chaos raged outside. We stayed locked in there until the police arrived and started carting people off to jail. The next morning, the wedding photographer showed up for the scheduled photo shoot, completely unaware of what had happened. I had to break the news to him. If he wanted pictures of the wedding party, he could find them at the local jail. The chef and I stayed friends, but neither of us lasted long at that job after that nightmare of a wedding. Story 7. About a decade ago, I was staying at a massive hotel when I stumbled upon a wedding reception happening in the ballroom. A group of what I can only describe as rough-looking hippies had taken over the space. While I was sitting at the bar, one of the groomsmen invited me to join them for food and drinks. They apparently had way too much. Free food and alcohol? Sure, why not? The moment I walked into the ballroom, I regretted it. The air was thick with the overwhelming scent of body odor mixed with food. It was unbearably hot inside. Many guests, both men and women, weren't even wearing shirts, and almost no one had shoes on. Only a handful of people were dressed somewhat appropriately, but the overall vibe was more music festival gone wrong than wedding. Instead of a DJ, they had a guy on stage surrounded by an assortment of instruments. Drums, bongos, a guitar, a rain stick, and, I'm pretty sure, a didgeridoo. Not wanting to be rude, I grabbed some grilled asparagus and made a swift exit as soon as no one was watching. The next morning, I saw that the hotel had cordoned off the ballroom area, and a large housekeeping crew was busy stacking trash bags into rolling garbage bins. The sheer amount of cleanup required made me feel genuinely bad for the staff. Story 8. A wedding between 2 college friends was just awkward. The bride had sewn her own dress, but it was a size too big. She was very petite, and the dress looked like an oversized satin nightgown thrown together at the last minute. Their first kiss ever was at the altar. It was so stiff and awkward that the pastor actually said, "Oh, come on, you can do better than that." Then came the parental blessings. The groom's family kept it short, sweet, and private. The bride's parents, however, turned theirs into an emotional, drawn-out ordeal. They loudly sobbed while speaking for 15 minutes each. The reception was potluck style, but there wasn't enough food for all the guests. The wedding colors were baby blue and lavender, and a mutual friend served as the DJ. At one point, the bride's mother handed him a note and asked him to read it aloud. So in front of everyone, he announced, "Groom, your mother-in-law says you can pet the kitties now." Backstory: the previous spring break, the bride's mother had bought her a baggy t-shirt covered in kittens. Coincidentally, the kitten graphics happened to be placed right at chest level. I had offered to do the flowers, boutonnieres, corsages, and centerpieces, but the wedding party didn't store them properly. By the next day, everything had wilted and looked incredibly sad. Oh, and did I mention it was a dry wedding? Story 9. I once attended a Matrix-themed wedding. The groomsmen all wore floor-length leather jackets and tiny sunglasses. The MC had even put together a slideshow of scenes from the movie, but with the groomsmen's faces badly photoshopped onto the characters. They insisted on calling each other Neo and Morpheus while high-fiving like it was the coolest thing ever. It was painful to watch. Beyond the awkward theme, there was heavy tension in the air. Turns out the groom had cheated on the bride just weeks before the wedding, but she still decided to go through with it. His family was trashy and blamed her for his cheating, saying she wasn't good enough for him. Meanwhile, her family was livid that she took him back and obviously hated both the groom and his family. The maid of honor, the bride's sister, gave a sarcastic speech. "We're just so glad to welcome you to the family, Greg." The groom's side completely missed the sarcasm, but everyone who knew the situation was cringing. Then came the groom's father, who was loaded, and I mean financially, though he was probably also drunk. He stood up and gave a long, rambling speech about a wife giving teaspoons of sugar to God. It made no sense and had some pretty cyst undertones. To cut him off, they quickly started the music. That's when things got even worse. The groom's drunk father hit the dance floor and started grinding on a woman who was very much not his wife. His actual wife saw this and completely lost it, screaming at him in front of everyone. The fight got so intense that they cut the music and had a 4-piece high school band play classical music instead, which of course sounded awful, featuring a particularly squeaky clarinet. Then, as if the universe itself was cringing, it suddenly started pouring rain. People began making polite excuses to leave. The last thing I saw was the groomsmen running to their cars, holding their trench coats over their heads to protect their tiny sunglasses, while the band played a painfully off-key Matrix theme. It was amazing in the worst way possible. Story 10. A friend of mine was about to get married, and we all knew it was a terrible idea. At his bachelor party the night before, after he went to bed, the rest of us sat around asking each other, why is he even marrying her? She was rude, stuck up, and had pretty much bullied him into the relationship. But he was an adult, so we let him do his thing. The next day at the wedding, only about 10 people showed up. Our friend stood there, visibly shaking as he held the ring until he dropped it. Panic set in as he scrambled to find it. Then in the middle of the ceremony, the bride's dad stormed up, wearing a sleeveless t-shirt, sunglasses, and holding a beer, and started yelling, "Find the damn ring!" So there was our friend, on his hands and knees in the grass, searching for this thing in front of everyone. The bride, instead of helping, started cussing him out before storming off in frustration. She eventually came back and announced, "I needed to drink a beer and smoke a cigarette, but I'm fine now." We never found the ring. He just mimed slipping it onto her finger, and they moved on. They divorced 6 months later. When we finally talked to him about it, he admitted he had no idea why he had proposed to her in the first place. Story 11. I used to work at a venue that hosted weddings, receptions, and other big events. It was a massive tent-like building on a beautiful lakeside property, and renting it cost anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. One family rented it for what turned out to be the trashiest wedding I had ever seen. The theme, peacocks, the decorations, black and teal paper plates, a few random peacock feathers, and cheap teal paper cups. They insisted on setting everything up the night before, despite being warned that the open-air structure would lead to dirt and spider webs getting all over their decorations. They ignored the advice, then pitched a fit when they showed up the next morning to find exactly what they had been warned about. Then the bride realized she hadn't tried on her dress since buying it, and she had gained weight. She couldn't zip it up. Instead of finding a quick fix, she bought a white tank top to wear underneath and just left the dress unzipped. After the ceremony, the entire wedding party got incredibly drunk. The bride's mother set up a chair in the middle of the dance floor, sat the groom down, and cheered on her daughter as she performed an extremely enthusiastic lap dance. Story 12. This wedding was a disaster from start to finish. The bride was my older cousin. She had 4 kids from 4 different fathers, but this was her first marriage. Our family, about 20 to 30 people, traveled from the Midwest to a small town in the Southeast for the wedding. It was the middle of summer, so it was miserably hot and humid. And to make it worse, nothing was air-conditioned. Not the motel, not the church, not even the reception hall. The motel was awful. Some kids got locked inside a room because the doorknob had been broken. The phone didn't work, and there were flying cockroaches everywhere. Motel staff eventually had to break a window to get them out. At the bride's parents' house, her dad, my uncle, never got up from his recliner, where he was watching late 80s WrestleMania VHS tapes. Next to him, a box overflowing with empty beer cans. The groomsmen's situation was a mess. 2 of them got arrested for coca distribution before the wedding, so they recruited a cousin to stand in since he was the same size and could fit the rented suit. The bridesmaids were also down too because they couldn't get the day off from Kmart. A cousin had to step in, but the dress didn't fit, so she just draped it over her shoulder. During the ceremony, they realized they had forgotten to buy a unity candle. The officiant's wife ran to Kmart to grab one, but the ceremony started before she returned, so everyone had to stand there awkwardly waiting for 10 minutes. The bride's bouquet? A fake potted sunflower. The reception was a mess. They had no drinks until the bride's mom spent their fridge rent money on some Sprite. There was no DJ either, just a boombox and some scratched-up CDs. The only 2 CDs that didn't skip were a Leanne Rimes album and the Dr. Dolittle soundtrack. The limo? A 1970s Cadillac that caught on fire. The food? My parents had given them $150 to make sure there was food. The bride later thanked them, adding, "And there was even enough left over for these beautiful acrylic nails." When the food arrived, it was 1 tray of baked beans and 1 tray of still half-frozen chicken wings. The groom's family rushed the table and took everything. When a polka song was finally played, the groom's entire side of the family stood up and left. Later that night, a massive snake attacked a family member's small dog. Someone killed the snake, but then asked my dad, an experienced hunter, to help butcher it to retrieve the dog's body. He refused. Oh, and all of the wedding gifts had the groom's last name misspelled because their DIY invitations had a typo, and no one wanted to correct the person who printed them. The marriage didn't last. The groom got arrested for his ties to the same coca operation as the missing groomsman, and the marriage was annulled. But the bride? She kept his last name. Story 13. Small oil town off the Gulf Coast of Texas. A biker wedding for a couple that had already been together for decades. That morning, I met up with the bride to help carry liquor to the venue, which was the local VFW. We met in a gas station parking lot. She showed up in a tank top, no bra, completely unbothered as everything bounced freely. She popped open her trunk and handed me 6 Tide detergent containers, each one full of pre-mixed shots. All right then, fast forward to the wedding. I pulled up to the VFW surrounded by motorcycles in my Honda sedan. I was wearing slacks and a button-down, which made me feel completely out of place, but I rolled with it. The groom stood at the altar, the bar, in full biker patch, smoking a cigarette as the bride walked in. She did wear a dress, but joked that it was the first time she had worn one in over 20 years. The reception was rowdy, full of fights. The cops were called at least once. At some point, the groom had to be taken away in an ambulance. Turns out, his best man had laced the pot with something much stronger and didn't tell anyone. Just another night in Freeport. Story 14. I was a wedding DJ for years, and I've seen some things. Drunk guests, trashy dancing, but nothing compared to the full brawl that broke out at a very nice country club. This was pre-cell phone era, so unfortunately, I never got video of it. The bride's brother, BB, and the best man, BM, already hated each other. Things escalated when BB took off his tux jacket and shirt during dinner, revealing a wife-beater underneath. BM walked over and reminded him where he was. They exchanged words, a little shoving. BB was asked to step outside to cool off. Later, BB came back during the dancing. Still not fully dressed, but whatever. People were having fun. But then BB couldn't find his jacket. He immediately accused BM of taking it, getting loud and cursing. BM, completely done with the guy, walked up behind him, tapped his shoulder, and the second BB turned around. Bam! BM slugged him, and then it was on. At this point, everyone had their beer muscles on. Groomsmen, bridesmaids, even the hall manager tried to intervene, but caught a stray punch to the face. The bride got knocked to the ground and couldn't get up because of how tight her dress was. She just lay there, turtled, as chaos erupted around her. I watched this tornado of fists move toward my DJ setup and started packing fast. I loaded my gear into my car just as the police arrived. I didn't stick around to see how it ended, but I'm grateful they paid me earlier in the evening. Story 15. This was a fake wedding, though the guests didn't know that at the time. From the start, the atmosphere felt tense. The groom looked like he might cry at the altar. The bride entered wearing a dress that did not fit properly. It had a hoop skirt that was too large for the short dress, making it sit at an awkward angle and bounce around as she walked. The ceremony itself felt strained, and having recently gotten married ourselves, my wife and I noticed something odd. The officiant never said the legally required line for a wedding in Australia. No paperwork was signed either. At the reception, almost the entire table of the bride and groom's families, which turned out to be the groom's side, left immediately after dinner started. Turns out the groom's dad was supposed to pay for the bar tab but didn't before walking out. Meanwhile, the bride and groom barely interacted, aside from an incredibly awkward first dance. Weeks later, they separated. The backstory? The bride, older than the groom, had been pressuring him into marriage. The groom got cold feet but didn't want to break up with her. His parents were in poor health, and when he tried backing out, the bride started harassing them about him trying to leave. Desperate to end the conflict, he reluctantly agreed to move forward. The officiant, sensing the hesitation, refused to legally marry them. Instead, he suggested a commitment ceremony as a compromise. The bride agreed, but insisted on not telling anyone, pretending it was a real wedding. Since legal paperwork in Australia has to be filed 30 days in advance, there was no time to get a new officiant, plus they had already put down deposits that were non-refundable. So in the end, it was a staged wedding to save face. Story 16. This wedding was half ultra-Mormon, half recovering addicts. The bride's mother had a habit of getting her daughter's attention by simply standing in front of whatever she was looking at, whether it was the groom, the photographer, or the DJ. Didn't matter. She was also noticeably high for most of the wedding. There were 22 people in the bridal party, but only 2 of the bridesmaids were friends from before she met her Mormon community. The non-Mormon bridesmaids were constantly being pulled away by the Mormon ones anytime they were together. Since it was a dry wedding, the non-Mormon guests went across the street, bought liquor, and started serving themselves. The cake smash went horribly wrong, right into the bride's hair. This led to the Mormon side talking trash about the drinkers, which led to the drinkers trying to pick fights with the Mormons. The wedding ended early. There were tears, absolute disaster. Ironically, the couple are both dentists now. Story 17. This was a fancy wedding. Outdoor ceremony, high-end lakefront reception. Everything was beautiful. Then the bride's dad stood up for his toast. Her parents had been divorced for over 25 years. But that didn't stop him from using his daughter's wedding as a chance to publicly roast his ex-wife for 10 to 15 minutes straight. He started by saying how she had an affair with the tennis instructor he paid for. Then he went down the list of men she dated after him. He talked about how she could never hold a job and just used his money. Her current husband was sitting right there, and the bride's dad turned on him too, calling him the latest flavor of the week and predicting he wouldn't be around by the time his daughter got back from her honeymoon. Then he looped back to the mother and laid into her again. It was brutal. At first, I thought I was mishearing things because I had been drinking. But the longer it went on, the more I realized that, no, this was actually happening. What's wild is that no one stopped him. They just let him go until he finally ran out of steam. He didn't mention his daughter or the groom once. Just used the speech as a 15-minute hate session against his ex-wife. Absolutely unreal. Story 18. A week before the wedding, the bride and groom tried to get me involved in a threesome. Side note, I'm not even really friends with the bride. I'm friends with the bridal party and we all work together. which is how I ended up at the bachelorette party. I was also the only one from out of town, so when the night ended, everyone left the hotel, despite originally agreeing to stay, except for me and the bride. She had gotten a little too excited and called her fiancé. I was already asleep at that point. Since we had a double queen room, I woke up to the groom-to-be pestering me to join them. My car keys were missing. Turns out a friend took them because they were worried I'd drive home drunk, which is something I have never done. So now I couldn't even escape to my car to avoid the bride and groom. They couldn't convince me to join, so they just started doing their thing in the bed next to me. I had never prayed for death so much in my life. The only reason they were even getting married was because they were casual partners who ended up expecting a child. They didn't start officially dating until she was about 6 months along, mostly because the groom had been dragging his feet. The bride's father hated him. He spent the entire wedding looking furious. Both the bride and groom got absolutely wasted at the reception, and at one point, he was getting a little too handsy with her on the dance floor. The bride's father and the groom ended up in a full-on fight, and the father left the wedding. Oh, and the entire wedding was Tinkerbell themed. Story 19. This was the trashiest wedding I've ever been to. My brother had his wedding in the mountains, right next to a river. Everyone got completely hammered and neglected to clean up all the barbecue platters from dinner, deciding to leave them for the next morning. We were staying in a cabin on the property. Me, my family, my brother, and his new wife. In the middle of the night, still half drunk, we were woken up by loud noises, like something was trying to break into the cabin. My brother and I grabbed our guns, looked out the window, and saw the biggest black bear I've ever laid eyes on. It had jumped into the back of my brother's pickup truck and was absolutely destroying the trash bags full of half-eaten barbecue, scattering garbage everywhere. There was nothing we could do but hope no one had passed out outside. Eventually, the bear wandered off and we went back to sleep. The next morning, it looked like a garbage bomb had exploded. Every bit of trash from the night before had been spread across the entire venue, and we had to clean it up while hungover beyond belief. The bear had even knocked over a full-size dumpster and spread that mess out too. It was an absolute nightmare, and I wanted to disappear. Story 20. I'm late to the party, but here goes. This happened in my home state of West Virginia. This story involves my brother and his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Crystal. They dated for about 6 years, and she cheated on him with a significant portion of our friend group. 2 of the guys she cheated with were named Mikey and Philip. When my brother found out, they broke up. A few months later, Crystal and Mikey announced they were getting married. Since we were all still friends, most of us attended the wedding, except for my brother, for obvious reasons. At the reception, while we were getting absolutely trashed, Crystal came by our table. I made a passing comment about how I always thought she'd end up as my sister-in-law someday. She said she thought so too, but that my brother didn't stop the wedding when the preacher asked if anyone objected. Mind you, he wasn't even there. Basically, she only married Mikey in some weird attempt to get my brother to make a grand gesture. Later, Philip, who was beyond drunk, accidentally bumped into a little kid, knocking him over. The kid's dad immediately punched him in the face. Philip, completely confused and wasted, just got into his car and drove off. Crystal started freaking out, sobbing. Meanwhile, Mikey drank way too much and ended up puking his guts out in the bathroom. His mom then screamed at Crystal to go take care of him because that's her job now. I blacked out after that, so I don't remember the rest. Years later, I ran into Crystal outside of Walmart. She was very pregnant. She told me she and Mikey had gotten divorced, that she'd remarried, and that she was probably going to get divorced again. Before I deleted Facebook, I remember her constantly posting cheesy memes about true love and commitment. Sometimes I miss West Virginia. To be fair, I have been to some very nice weddings in my home state. This one just happened to fit every Appalachian stereotype. Story 21. They met and married within months. He was in his 40s. She was in her late 20s or early 30s. I was shocked she was getting married, shocked that he was the guy, and shocked that I was invited. But I felt like I had to go. He had 3 preteen kids who did whatever they wanted, and they all lived out in the backwoods. The wedding was held at his cabin, potluck style. There were no chairs, no sides separating families, no real structure. Just everyone standing around watching them say their vows in the yard. There wasn't even a photographer. When they kissed, everyone suddenly pulled out their guns and fired them into the air. I hadn't noticed anyone carrying weapons before, so that was a huge shock. Then instead of a first dance, The happy couple hopped on an ATV and took off into the woods for a victory lap. When they came back, we all ate what I can only describe as swamp people food, and everyone got ridiculously drunk. I left early with a friend. On the drive home, we both sat in silence for a moment before finally saying, "So, what the hell was that?" They obviously divorced shortly after. Story 22. So, our friends got married about 8 years ago. Since the bride was a dual citizen, American-Canadian, and the groom was Canadian, they decided to have a fun Vegas wedding before their real and very elegant wedding the following year. The idea was to get the legal marriage done so he could start the U.S. residency process. This wedding was all friends except for one of her kids. It was a costume wedding, so everyone wore fun Halloween outfits. I was a very revealing magician's assistant, and my husband dressed as Spock. The wedding guests included a dodgeball team and a few other quirky characters. The bride's son brought a friend, both were of legal age, and they showed up in matching giant boob costumes, literally a perfect pair. The bride went as Elvira, and the groom dressed as Nacho Libre. Their costumes were amazing, fully homemade, and so well done. The venue was one of those classic Vegas chapels, and the officiant was a Tom Jones impersonator. The bride's son and his friend, the giant boobs, walked her down the aisle and then stood on either side of the stage, swaying in sync with the Tom Jones song that the officiant performed before starting the ceremony. Everyone was completely gone on pot brownies and alcohol. The ceremony was streamed live to friends and family who couldn't attend, but they had no idea it was a costume wedding. So, imagine their shock when they saw two giant boobs escorting the bride down the aisle. Afterward, a limo took us to a tiki bar, where we drank way too much. From there, we went to a steakhouse at Caesar's Palace for a late dinner. So many people stopped us on the strip to take pictures. It was a totally trashy wedding, but honestly, the most fun wedding I've ever been to. A year later, they had their real wedding, a stunning fairy tale ceremony in a castle, followed by a lavish dinner and dancing at a banquet hall. It was absolutely beautiful, but honestly, that Vegas wedding was epic, and I'll never forget it. Story 23. I had a bad feeling about this wedding from the moment we arrived at the combined bachelorette party, where the bride and groom were actively fighting over whether or not coca should be allowed at their wedding. On the day of the ceremony, my concerns only grew. Before walking down the aisle, I found myself holding the bride's veil back so she could take a hit from her bong. Apparently, this was my new bridesmaid duty. Meanwhile, my husband got trapped in our hotel room because the groom and his friends were deliberately delaying the ceremony so they could do lines of coke in the hallway. Why? No one knows. Things really started to unravel when we saw how much the photographer was struggling. She was frantically trying to wrangle the bridal party and family members for pictures, but everyone kept disappearing to secretly, Reed obviously, do more coke. The whole wedding timeline fell apart. The photos took hours. They only stopped because they literally lost the sun. By the time dinner was served, a mix of poutine and finger foods, the DJ was clearly confused. They played Shout during the meal, but the bride and groom were still missing. Slowly, all the older guests and non-drug-using attendees began leaving. It was getting late, and by this point, there had been no toasts, no speeches, no first dance. Just this weird, unsettling energy that comes when the guests of honor are nowhere to be found. At one point, the bride was running barefoot on gravel roads, trying to say goodbye to her relatives through their car windows before they drove off. Then my husband overheard the groom saying, "That's it, fellas. I've done all my responsibilities for the night. Time for 8-foot chains." No one had any idea what that meant. We assumed it was some kind of drug lingo, but to this day, I've never heard anyone use that phrase. If anyone out there knows what it means, please let me know. Sadly, the couple accidentally got pregnant on their honeymoon. They separated just 3 weeks after their baby was born. They had been together since middle school, but now they're completely toxic to each other. It's honestly heartbreaking. Coca is a hell of a drug. Story 24. I just attended a wedding with my significant other, who barely knew the bride. They had met once years ago through a dating website before he and I got together, and they had only kept in touch through social media. Despite this, she called him one of her best friends. The wedding had very few guests, and aside from her parents, we were the only people there for the bride. The rest were all the groom's family. We were also one of the only guests who brought a gift, a very nice bottle of bourbon. Throughout the event, my so had to keep dodging awkward questions about how he and the bride knew each other. The wedding itself was cute and intimate, The bride and groom were genuinely nice people, and I actually had a great time talking with the groom and his friends. But the whole time I kept wondering, why were we even invited? It wasn't about jealousy or anything like that. I just couldn't wrap my head around why the bride didn't have closer friends to invite. Because surely she had better options than a random Tinder match from 8 years ago. Story 25. OMG, my own wedding was the trashiest one I've ever attended. I got married in August 2015 to the father of my 2 kids. I was the one who proposed. I bought the very cheap rings, the outfits for the kids, and the marriage license. The original plan was to get married in the courtyard of our apartment complex. But since it looked like rain, we called a campground a couple of kilometers away and asked if we could use their covered pavilion for free. They said yes. We had very few guests, mostly just immediate family. But since we knew we'd have a honeymoon, one night in a nice hotel, and our parents had agreed to take care of the kids for the night, we figured, why not invite our weed dealer and his girlfriend and get lit? The campground wanted photos for publicity in exchange for letting us use the venue, so we got some professional pictures. They could have been nice, except both my husband and I were so ridiculously stoned that we ruined them by making the dumbest faces. After a super quick ceremony in an undecorated open-air wooden structure, we all headed to White Spot for dinner. For the honeymoon, we got completely wasted. I wandered around town in my wedding dress, drinking straight from a bottle, being absolutely belligerent. At 2 a.m., I tried to walk through a McDonald's drive-thru and got denied, which led to me screaming that I was going to burn it all down. Then I saw a cop and immediately shut up. At 3 a.m., we finally kicked our weed dealer and his girlfriend out of our hotel room so we could, consummate the marriage. But my now ex-husband passed out before anything happened. The marriage itself lasted less than 6 months, for reasons unrelated to all of this. But looking back, I was definitely dealing with some unhealed trauma back then. Story 26. My sister's second wedding, she married a guy we lovingly called Peanut Brain. He was, to put it nicely, not very bright. None of us were particularly thrilled about this marriage. We all made the longest drive to Tulsa for the wedding. The ceremony was held in what I guess was a church, though it honestly felt more like a cult headquarters. There were church pews, a cross, and a music stand for a pulpit. But there were also AK-47s framed on the walls. Real AK-47s. The preacher looked like a cross between Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. He wore robes like a minister, but also had a rifle strapped to his back, which he kept on throughout the entire ceremony. He talked way too much about consummating the marriage, to the point where he forgot about the vows and had to backtrack. Meanwhile, Peanut Brain's daughter was running wild around the church, and then proceeded to throw up all over the aisle in one of the pews. Just when we thought it couldn't get weirder, we were almost at the end of the ceremony when the doors at the back of the church unslammed open. A group of people shuffled in. The preacher literally stopped mid-sentence and yelled, "Hey, we'll be done in a few. You're early. Wait for me in the lobby." Then, like nothing happened, he turned back around and finished pronouncing them husband and wife. Afterward, he rushed all of us out into the lobby so he could get started on the next wedding. The people who had interrupted were waiting there. I cannot put into words the level of backwoods inbreeding that greeted us in that lobby. The bride in this wedding was very young and very pregnant. The groom was much older, probably in his late 30s. What I assume was the young bride's mother was ushering them inside to get married as quickly as possible. The girl looked like she was about to give birth at any moment. It was hands down the most surreal and disturbing wedding experience of my life. To this day, my family refuses to even speak about it. Story 27. This took place in rural Tennessee. When the bride and groom-to-be first met with the officiant, a friend of the bride's sister, at the biker bar he owned, things got interesting. One of the patrons, upon learning that the groom was from Scotland, ran up and grabbed him by the crotch. That set the tone. A week before the wedding, the officiant called the bride and asked if they could reschedule the ceremony from Saturday to Sunday. Why? Because there was a poker run happening on Saturday. A biker event where they ride from bar to bar, collecting cards, and whoever has the best hand at the end wins some money. Since the officiant had to run the bar for the event, he couldn't do the wedding. The plan had been to hold the ceremony by the lake next to the bar, which was also owned by the bar's owners. But on Sunday it rained. So it was suggested that they relocate to the pavilion behind the biker bar, where about 30 bikers were already in the middle of a BBQ. Included in this crowd was the same woman who had grabbed the groom. Since she lived next to the bar, she decided to contribute to the occasion by bringing a boom box with bagpipe music for the ceremony. Apparently, her late husband had been Scottish, and she got nostalgic, wanting to make the day extra special for the couple. Once the ceremony was complete, the couple, along with their two guests, were invited to join the biker BBQ. Instead of the bottle of champagne they had brought for toasts, they were handed a gallon of homemade dandelion wine. Much merriment ensued. The food was fantastic, and the bride and groom shared their wedding cake with the bikers. This was my wedding. We celebrate our 25th anniversary in a few months. Story 28. All right, here goes. Many years ago, I was in the Navy, stationed with the Marines. A friend of mine who was assigned to another platoon started dating a woman he met at a strip club, where she worked as a waitress. It quickly came out that she was currently divorcing one of the guys in the groom's own platoon because she had been caught cheating on him. Somehow, the groom wasn't immediately jumped by his entire unit. A miracle. Fast forward a month, and this guy announces he wants to marry her. Every single person in his life told him this was a terrible idea. I told him. Our friends told him. His platoon sergeant told him. His platoon commander told him. His company commander told him. Every single Navy leader in the battalion told him. Even the battalion chaplain told him. His company commander literally threatened to restrict him to the barracks just to stop him from going through with it. Spoiler, it didn't work. Then he asked me to be in his wedding. He said it was being held at a small secular chapel in a nearby town. He also promised he'd pay for dinner and all the booze I could drink. So obviously I said yes. One of our mutual friends got the same offer and immediately agreed, for the same reason. When I asked him who was attending, he explained that since it was last minute, we were deploying in 90 days, and because it wasn't being held in a church, none of their family members would be able to make it. Fast forward to the wedding day, my friend and I are completely lost, using printed MapQuest directions and an outdated atlas. We end up driving back and forth down one road so many times that a random homeowner actually comes outside to ask if we need help. We explain what we're looking for, and, with a very amused smile, they tell us to keep an eye out for a license plate sign advertising weddings, set in the yard of a regular house. We drive up and park in front of a generic single-story ranch-style home with an attached garage. We ring the doorbell. A very sweet older lady answers, welcomes us in, and directs us to a side door on the garage. Inside, it's very obviously still a garage. They had attempted to cover up all the tools and junk with satin fabric and fake flowers. A dirty green indoor-outdoor carpet was rolled out to kind of hide the oil stains on the concrete floor. The bride and groom were already there. She was wearing a low-cut sundress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. He was in a borrowed set of dress blues because he had forgotten to get his own cleaned and pressed. The officiant? He reeked of booze and could barely stand. It was 11 a.m. The sweet older lady? Turns out she was his wife, and had whipped out a giant 1980s camcorder on her shoulder, along with an ancient film camera, running around trying to capture behind-the-scenes footage. The officiant stumbled over to my friend and me, insisting that we rehearse before the guests arrived. The groom chimed in that we were basically all here, except for his dad, who had suddenly decided to fly in at the last minute to try and talk him out of this disaster. So, we rehearsed. I played groomsman, maid of honor, father of the bride, ring bearer, and witness. My friend filled in for the rest. Eventually, it was time. The groom's dad arrived, looking absolutely livid. He sat in the furthest row of plastic lawn chairs, arms crossed, refusing to speak to anyone. The couple took their places under a dented second-hand aluminum archway, draped in artificial flowers. The officiant, having refreshed himself before the ceremony, was now even less steady. His wife refused to use the zoom function on the camcorder, so she was practically shoving it in people's faces. The ceremony was brief and unintelligible, mostly because the officiant was slurring through it, like he was trying to whisper past God so he wouldn't get smited for being part of this mess. Then they slow danced to a popular country song that had clearly been recorded off the radio onto a cassette tape. And just like that, it was time for a knockoff Olive Garden dinner. During the meal, my friend and I snuck outside to decorate the groom's car with white shoe polish. My friend's wedding bells with bows started looking a little too much like certain body parts, so I adjusted mine to match. Did you guys know there's a difference between white window markers and white shoe polish? We didn't, but the groom sure did. when it took 2 months of scrubbing to get it off. Every time it rained, the outlines of our artwork magically reappeared. Anyway, we deployed, she cheated on him and stole all his money, just like she had done to her previous 2 husbands. She filed for divorce right before we came home, which of course is exactly what everyone who warned him had predicted. Ah, the classic military marriage. To this day, it remains one of the most memorable weddings I've ever attended, mostly because it was also the first wedding I attended as an adult. Story 29. When I was 14, my parents made me attend the wedding of one of their friends who was in a rock band with my stepdad. This was in Springfield, Missouri. I was a lost kid back then, dressing in a 1980s punk style even though it was the early 2000s. I showed up with a mohawk, a studded leather jacket, and weirdly tight pants. There was a lot of alcohol. I got drunk. An adult woman asked me to dance with her, and I agreed because despite my aggressive appearance, I was actually pretty nice and innocent. I ended up with a situation I tried to awkwardly hide because I thought it might offend her. Feeling overwhelmed by everything, I eventually stepped away and sat alone for a while. I ended up on the sidelines, just vibing well into the night. Around 11 p.m., some people got into a fight. There was a lot of screaming, and one guy hit another in the face. Story 30. I was invited to a wedding by a coworker I didn't know at all. The ceremony took place in a small Mexican church, heavily decorated with fake red roses everywhere. The reception, however, was held in an abandoned roller rink. When we arrived, the lights were off, and it was completely empty. Everyone had to stand around while some people set up tables and chairs. The buffet consisted of cold tortillas, room temperature baked beans, and shredded cheese. That was it. During the reception, they held a money dance. The bride picked the extended version of Rapper's Delight to maximize the time people could pay to dance with her. Meanwhile, her mother walked around each table with a large black garbage bag, shaking it expectantly, waiting for people to throw in money. At the end of the song, the bride counted the cash, grabbed the microphone, and announced they would be doing a second money dance because they were very disappointed with how little the first one brought in. I left after that. Story 31. This was my own wedding. It took place at a beautiful country club, and I wore a handmade dress my grandmother, a master seamstress, had created for me. The man I married, however, had some questionable family members. They spiked a bottle of liquor with ecstasy. He later claimed he had no idea, and dared him to drink it all. He did. During the ceremony, when the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," he licked my face. A full, flat-tongued lick. He then wandered off to the men's restroom, stripped naked, and sat on the floor. No one knew where he was during the reception, so my grandfather had to dance with me instead of my husband. When it was finally time to leave, my father walked me to the door, and there he was, in the parking lot, waiting to take a swing at my dad. He was so drugged up that he missed, and my father shoved him so hard he slid across the pavement and ended up under a truck. The police were called, and he started fighting his own family as they tried to hold him down. I was inconsolable. My cousins stayed with me all weekend. By the next day, word had spread throughout town, and everyone had a laugh at my expense. Story 32. My coworkers and I will always refer to this as the wedding of the century. We all worked shift work, and the groom had recently switched to a different shift. He invited both crews, about 20 people, so there were plenty of witnesses to the chaos. One of our co-workers had a life that was a bit of a train wreck. Let's call her Helen. The ceremony itself was uneventful, except for the priest mistakenly referring to the newlyweds as Mr. and Mrs., bride's maiden name, instead of the groom's last name. Since the groom was a bit of a chauvinist, we all found it hilarious. At the time, we thought that would be the most memorable part of the day. Fast forward to the reception. There was an open bar, but only for 2 hours, which was a smart way to keep costs down. However, Helen took full advantage, grabbing multiple handfuls of shots, which had people joking that the real party was just beginning. One of the other co-workers brought a lady friend who worked at a different facility in the same company. She had a reputation, to put it mildly. Things escalated quickly when Helen and this woman started getting friendly. Then really friendly. It turned into full-blown PDA, so much so that they ended up sitting on a chair together during dinner, essentially reenacting scenes from Showgirls. I had the perfect view of the chaos unfolding to my left, while sitting across from a table full of supervisors and their wives. Watching as word spread among them was priceless. First curiosity, then disgust, then full-blown horror. It was amazing to witness. Eventually, Helen and her new lady friend decided to get even more comfortable and took their activities to the restroom. This is where things went completely off the rails. The bride's 5-year-old daughter, who happened to be in the restroom with her grandmother, ended up learning what certain noises sound like in a bathroom stall. The mother of the bride was not amused. At first, 2 of the co-workers' wives were sent to break things up, but that didn't work. Eventually, the bride herself had to step in and demand that the 2 women leave the reception. Story 33. To start, I didn't just attend this wedding, I officiated it. I put that in quotes because it wasn't a legally binding marriage. Just your average redneck marijuana-fueled throuple exchanging vows. Yes, throuple, as in 3 people. It was a glorious experience. To this day, it still makes me feel better about my own life choices. I was actually the 3rd person they had asked to officiate. The first 2 bailed a week before the ceremony. Wife number 1 used the week as an excuse for a drug-fueled vision quest. The husband was fully committed to a dirt bike theme, drunk the entire time or high on something. Wife number 2 took the opportunity to go full bridezilla over the entire ceremony and reception. The ceremony was held in the middle of a dirt bike track, 1.5 hours from the nearest town, with no signs to the location. No toilets, no toilet paper, not even a curtain strung up in a tree. The food? Take a deep breath. Papa John's pizza, a chicken salad hot dip made by wife number 2's sister, and a boxed cake baked by wife number 1's mother the day before. The cake was then decorated by wife number 2's mother using a used dirt bike helmet and some dirty, also used, kids' dirt bike toys. The only drink options were Mountain Dew or Budweiser. They didn't even have water for their own kids. I ended up supplying the kids with water from my own stash for a different event. The husband arrived on a dirt bike. Wife number 1 was an hour late. Wife number 2 was 1.5 hours late. Keep in mind, it was only a 5-minute walk from the RV they were using as a prep area. They forgot to hire a photographer, shocking I know, and at the last minute asked a friend to take pictures with her phone. She did a great job, considering she had a newborn in one arm and was smoking at the same time. After waiting an hour and a half for things to start, I couldn't help myself. I opened with the Three's Company theme song, reciting it like a poem. Only 3 people in the entire wedding party and guest list got the joke. The mothers, on the other hand, started crying, thinking I had gifted them with a heartfelt, beautiful poem. After the ceremony, the party took off on dirt bikes. Wife number 2 promptly flipped off the back of hers and landed in horse manure. The kids burst out laughing, and she lost her mind, screaming about how selfish and rude they were. Wife number 1 rode back and immediately started a screaming match with her. "Don't you yell at my kids." Meanwhile, at the reception, the husband began handing out marijuana to everyone, and I mean everyone. After wife number 2 was thoroughly high, she chose that moment to announce she was pregnant. I glanced over at wife number 1 and the husband, who were both cheering, and then noticed their 7-year-old squatting against a tree, yelling for toilet paper. I took that as my cue to leave, before I had to give a statement to some kind of authority. I told you it was glorious. Story 34. The venue was a rented section of a decommissioned rural high school. It had been shut down due to age and extreme disrepair, but for some reason, it was still available for various community activities, such as AA meetings, basketball practice, and of course, weddings. On this particular day, all 3 of those activities were happening simultaneously. As an internet-ordained wedding officiant, I was a last-minute stand-in for an old classmate's wedding. Sometimes this prestigious title comes with wedding party privileges as compensation for my services. In this case, it meant a catered lunch from Subway. I politely declined, assuming I'd just wait for the reception dinner. That's when I learned, to my embarrassment, that the reception dinner was also being provided by Subway. Did I mention the wedding theme was Doctor Who and horror movies? The bridesmaids had homemade phone booth boutonnieres, while the groomsmen had either Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger pinned to their suits. Now let me paint a picture of the conditions. The groomsmen got ready in an abandoned science classroom. It was filled with random old lab equipment, but no tables or chairs. What it did have, however, was a massive hole in the ceiling, exposing what was almost certainly asbestos-laden 1950s-era insulation pouring out. Oh, and rat droppings. Lots of rat droppings. Also, the groom's younger sister was there. She was one of the guys and stuck around, making casual commentary about our underwear choices while we got dressed. Meanwhile, we were openly drinking and getting rowdy directly across the hall from an AA meeting in session. 10 minutes before the ceremony, the bride's brother, one of the groomsmen, lost it. He started freaking out because his ex had shown up with a date. He immediately started ripping off his wedding attire, repeatedly saying, "I gotta leave right now, or I'm gonna get in a fight. It's my sister's special day, and that wouldn't be right." Before anyone could make sense of what was happening, he jumped in his truck and sped off. We scrambled to find a last-minute stand-in, and then went ahead with the mercifully short ceremony. Afterward, I joined the wedding party outside for photos, without announcing to the guests that they could get up and start eating. The photographer was on a time limit, and I was told, they'll figure it out. About 20 minutes later, after we had finished taking superhero-themed photos, I casually strolled back into the cafeteria-turned-reception hall. Every single guest was still sitting in their chairs, exactly where we had left them after the ceremony. I had to awkwardly get on stage, apologize to the very confused and visibly frustrated guests, and tell them they could finally go get their lovely Subway dinner. The rest of the day was fairly normal, and the newlyweds were genuinely happy. Now, I don't mean to sound pretentious. I don't expect every wedding to be some high-class affair. I've officiated plenty of backyard weddings, and I got married at a county courthouse. But damn, this one was something to remember. Story 35. The bride's family came from a, let's say, more rural lifestyle. That lifestyle included smoking crack, yes, actual crack coca, and faking injuries on job sites after a few weeks of employment. For those unaware, coca stays in your system for about 3 days, so plan accordingly, kids. Also, rampant alcoholism and violence. The wedding took place in a church, somewhere I'd never been before. A total of about 20 people attended. The bride's entire family was late, all of them. The ceremony had already started when they came in. At first, I thought they were going to object to the wedding. Nope. They just sat down like nothing had happened. Then came the reception. Oh, it was something. It was a full-on BYOB/C event where the C stood for crack, and it was held in someone's suburban backyard. Yes, these people lived in the suburbs. There was an above-ground pool in case anyone felt like taking a dip. 3 very smelly mongrel dogs were chained to a tree, and their mess hadn't been cleaned up in, based on the stench, 3, maybe 4 months. The entire place reeked. I stopped and grabbed a 6-pack to share with my buddy, the groom, to congratulate him on his big day. We had a beer together. Now remember how I said the bride's family smoked crack? Well, for the first time in my life, I witnessed someone smoking crack. Not only that, but I watched as they exhaled the smoke directly into their significant other's face. Then the other person took a hit and did the same thing back. Apparently, crack smoke is still potent even after exhalation, so secondhand smoke can still get you high. Story 36. My brother-in-law knocked up his girlfriend, so they threw a wedding together quickly before she got too big to fit into her dress. The bride was surprised by her brother, who was able to attend after making parole. He had just been released from prison the day before. Meanwhile, the bride's father spent the entire ceremony cradling a shotgun because he thought it would be funny. During the reception, the groom and the bride's brother got into a fight. To break it up, the bride's father fired the shotgun into the air. None of us knew it had been loaded the entire time. The cops showed up. The groom and the bride's brother could not keep their mouths shut and ended up getting arrested. Turns out both of them were carrying meth. To top it all off, we later found out that the bride's brother had actually bought meth from the groom right before the wedding. Now they're both in prison. The brother for violating parole and possession, and my brother-in-law for dealing. Story 38. I don't know if this qualifies as trashy, but the bride essentially trapped everyone on a carnival cruise for her destination wedding without telling anyone where they were actually going. The trip cost over $5,000 per person. When we finally arrived at the destination, we discovered that everyone could have saved thousands of dollars by simply flying in and staying at the resort instead. On the way back, nearly everyone got seasick, including the bride's younger brother, his wife, and their 1-year-old baby. Meanwhile, the bride casually mentioned that the real reason she planned it this way was to prevent the trashy relatives from attending her wedding. She also didn't contribute anything to help her family pay for the trip, but she did pay for an amateur photographer to come along to document the trip and the wedding. She covered the photographer's room, food, and even paid for all of their excursions.